Hi there and welcome. The key to understanding the Lucy Letby case is to recognise that even Attila the Hun could not have been convicted in a British court on any single one of the 22 charges tried in an original case. But lump all 22 together and throw them at an inoffensive and conscientious young woman who may well have not had so much as a parking ticket in her life, and you end up with 14 of them sticking. I won't even dignify last July's farcical attempt to manipulate public opinion by resurrecting one of the 6 failed charges to generate a 15th conviction with any comment. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the background facts and circumstances across the years 2015 to 2017. I want to talk to you about them for 2 reasons. The first reason is that in combination they were powerful enough to take me from unquestioning acceptance of the media narrative on the day of the verdict, 18th of August 2023, to being sufficiently convinced of her innocence by the end of the month to find myself writing and posting a 1500-word essay arguing her innocence on Sarita Adams's Science on Trial website. The second reason is that the British media is studiously ignoring these facts and circumstances and seems to be trying to get us to forget them. As you all know, during the summer, in the aftermath of the banned New Yorker magazine article, the papers belatedly woke up to the fact that Miss Letby's convictions may be a miscarriage of justice, but in writing about the issue have focused on the scientific community's concerns about the flawed science on which the circumstantial evidence used to convict Miss Letby was based. None of the articles, these revisionist articles I've read, mentioned her personal circumstances, the grievance she had and won, or analysed the statements written on the so-called confessional post-it note. The omission of those facets from the revisionist challenge to the conviction seems very strange, because all of them tend to pour cold water on the notion that Miss Letby is capable of being a cold-hearted serial killer. As such, their inclusion in this new narrative would complement the flawed science thing, which is all they seem to be pushing, thereby making the argument for quashing the convictions, or at the very least a retrial, even stronger. In the absence of these other elements in the newly minted narrative, the newly minted Lucy Letby might actually be innocent narrative, it just seems to be there to lay the groundwork for circumscribing the terms of reference of any future public inquiry into Miss Letby's case, circumscribing it to the benefit, I believe, of any senior staff at the Countess of Chester who might find it uncomfortable answering questions about the curious timing of the decision to call in Cheshire Constabulary, as well as giving full disclosure of the motives for that decision. The really big question of whether Miss Letby was cynically scapegoated to avoid an almost certainly successful clinical negligence claim by parents of some of the children, some of the babies, a claim which would have almost certainly been successful, a claim which would have been catastrophic for the local NHS trust and was likely to open the floodgates for similar claims up and down the country, is thereby deftly avoided. I try to be, I try to make it a policy to, if you like, scrutinize my motives for things that, for actions I take, especially something like this, which some people might see as controversial content. I'm reasonably confident, having looked into it, that I'm primarily motivated here by the wish to make a contribution to the unspoken project among morally engaged people of maintaining awareness of the continued plight of Miss Letby, and also to raise awareness and perhaps even educate on some of the less well publicized background aspects of the case. Background aspects which, in truth, constitute the genuine circumstantial evidence the court should have been focusing on, having made the eyebrow-raising decision that evidence of that nature was an acceptable basis for determining whether a young woman got her life back or went down in British history as the most heartless serial killer of them all. I also gratefully recognize that on this occasion, pursuing those primary objectives also furnishes the opportunity to draw attention to a neglected, underrated, and undervalued mental resource, the application of social intelligence to connect the dots in the absence of full information. Because that was what took me to see through this whole thing in, I'd say, about just over a week. The effective deployment of social intelligence is, in the first place, a function of nurturing rationality in relation to the assessment and evaluation of your own conduct and attitudes and the conduct and implicit or manifest attitudes of others. Completion of the process then depends on finding the moral fortitude to go with deductions arrived at and the conclusions naturally following, regardless of the conventional narrative on the subject. We're obviously not reinventing the wheel here. What has changed is that, without a shadow of a doubt, never before in human history has the ability to effectively deploy social intelligence been at such a premium as in the informationally toxic post-truth 21st century. This is a place where language has been repurposed by officialdom and mainstream media into a tool of obfuscation and misdirection instead of communication. And wealth is so concentrated and power so centralized that information can be withheld, abused, and manipulated on a scale and with a level of cynicism which was inconceivable only one generation ago. Now, to really underline what I'm trying to say, in the period since I did my blog post on Science on Trial, which I think I wrote it on the 31st of August and posted it on the 1st of September. In the period since the 1st of September, there, as we all know, there's been like a large number of revelations about the case. These revelations include the following. Well, not revelations and also new information. The largest possibly would being Sarita Adams's comprehensive, rigorously researched and devastating Science on Trial blog posts. I think she did about 5 or 6 of them, which totally annihilated the bogus science on which the insulin poisoning and the air embolism convictions were based. apart from that, there was also the debunking of the infamous death duty chart. There was the revelation that on the occasion when Dr. Jaram claimed that he entered the incubator room one night unannounced and more or less caught Miss Letby red-handed. It turns out that the door entry data shows that Miss Letby was actually with another nurse in the room, but the CPS messed up and didn't include that in the file, or included information saying something else. So that was another revelation. Another is the astonishing fact that Miss Letby was only writing these notes to self on the post-its on the advice of her therapist. And following on from that, obviously implied by that, the further evidence that she was sufficiently stressed out by what was going on at work, clearly long before the police were called in, to need professional help. On the face of it, those two facts would be things which would have humanized her in the eyes of the jury, and in addition would have instantly shot down the prosecution's confession note smear in relation to the post-it note. But somehow these were not communicated to the court. It's just past strange. For me, the other, this probably isn't an exhaustive list of all the stuff that's come out, but the next big thing for me, in some ways the biggest, is this: the proximity of the decision to call in Cheshire Constabulary with another event. That event being clinical negligence solicitor Justine Jones of Slater and Gordon, Chester branch, contacting the Countess of Chester Hospital, advising them that she had been instructed by parents of some of the dead children, some of the dead babies, and would be bringing a claim in clinical negligence against the hospital. The evidence for that proximity is this: both those events were reported not just on the same day in April 2017 by the Daily Mail, but actually in the same report. What that would suggest is, in all the circumstances, the only reasonable conclusion is that the decision to call in Cheshire Constabulary was a response to the impending civil claim. That's so because a civil claim cannot run parallel with a related criminal investigation. So, worst case scenario, the initiation of a criminal investigation would buy the hospital management months of time against that civil case, and at no cost, financial or otherwise. Now, as I said, all that stuff, that is all stuff which came out, which I did not know on the 31st of August when I was doing my 1500 word like essay arguing for Miss Letby's innocence. But even without all that information, this I am about to quote you directly from that blog post. This is where social intelligence was able to take me, or the deployment of social intelligence, even in the absence of all that information. So I quote, "Everything about the case against Miss Letby has been reverse engineered with industrial levels of artifice and disingenuousness. From the apparently provable fact that she can be shown to have been present at each event. Falling back on the oldest and occasionally only play in the worldwide policing playbook, Cheshire Police, having been given a suspect, did everything to make the available facts fit, and where those facts were wanting or laughably on life support, resorted to disinformation, character smears, and innuendo to give body to their narrative of guilt. It is a classic case of trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." Now, moving on to the things that actually took me from totally buying into the narrative on the 18th of August to writing this 1,500-word defense of Miss Letby less than 2 weeks later. As stated, I accepted the verdict uncritically with suitable horror on the 18th of August. That had a lot to do with me not having taken, for various reasons, well, not for various reasons, I was vaguely aware that a nurse was on trial. The trials obviously lasted 10 months or something, but whatever was going on in life, I just hadn't followed it. It just happened. I just happened to be home at that lunchtime, on Friday the 18th of August of 2023, when the BBC News website broke the story of the verdict. So it was natural to follow it, and that's how I first became aware of how the babies were supposed to have been killed. I have to say, the impact of that new information was like a concussion. My immediate reaction, within minutes of it, I was on one of those in the comments section of one of the reports on YouTube, and my first comment on it was as follows. This was what I said: "What must have been going on in this woman's head? What happened in her life to twist her in this way? She has now been convicted, so the priority should now be to learn from the case, because there must be other similarly damaged women out there in positions to do harm." For those first few days, I couldn't even bear to look at her image on the screen. I kind of had some sense that in the same way as, humor or laughter is infectious, I've kind of felt that I could be contaminated in some way by that kind of evil. That was a feeling. That was a feeling I had. I mean, my sleep was even disturbed for a couple of nights, although that may have had something to do with the fact that during those days I was getting into spending a lot of time online, getting into fights on the comments sections on in related videos, although I have to say, those comments, it wasn't really it wasn't a case of arguing with people who were challenging the verdict. It was more just challenging people who were buying into unhelpful ideas like face of evil and fate, which is it's a really that's just a sterile and empty throwaway phrase, not even a concept, and it's just something which doesn't help. Anyway, that's by the by. Moving on, it's like it was the end of the following week, so about getting on for a week after the verdict, when I first heard that there were people seriously considering fundraising for an appeal. My first thought of that was the old saying, no one ever went broke from underestimating people's capacity for bad taste. My second thought after that, though, was that, okay, I had to concede that the fact of her conviction being wholly based on circumstantial evidence was far from ideal for me. But for me, again, the most damning evidence against her was that at no point since arrest did she appear to have had an emotional meltdown or otherwise react as I would expect any normal person to react, having been thus accused of heinous offences of which they were innocent. Around that time, about, as I said, about getting on for a week after the verdict, was probably when I first encountered a person who was seriously in Miss Letby's corner at that time. It was a woman, and her tone made it clear that she was fully familiar with the setup at the Countess of Chester, and might even have been a former colleague of Miss Letby's. The thing about her, though, was that despite being clearly well educated, she was a particularly difficult and hugely unsatisfying person to have an exchange with. Because at first she would give hints that she knew stuff which I didn't, which was why she could rubbish my position that, well, any normal person would be freaking out, etc. But she wouldn't go into any details when I said, well, if you know something I don't, tell me. And beyond that, at one point, I even extended an olive branch to her, and she threw it back in my face, preferring to treat our exchange as a kind of zero-sum game in which cheap point scoring was the be-all and end-all. I don't know whether it was just the sheer frustration of the encounter with that woman, or the tantalizing prospect she raised that there might be relevant information that I wasn't aware of. That proved to be the catalyst. But whichever it was, that exchange in the comment section of one of those YouTube videos was the catalyst for me to put my concerns about getting too close to evil by really learning too much about it, for me to put those concerns be able to put them to one side and invest a little time into actually learning about the case. At that point, I'd literally limited myself just to 2 longish newspaper articles. I think that was on the evening of the 25th of August, and sometime the day after, I came across an image of the so-called confessional post-it note, which was of sufficiently high resolution to be able to read, and to read everything on there rather than just the stuff which was written in capitals. And that was what changed everything for me. That I mean, it was a all I can say is it shocked. I was shocked awake by it. It was the Rosetta Stone, really, because in its circumstances, in the chaotic structure and the equally chaotic content, it laid bare an ordinary soul in the grip of incomprehension and torment at unfolded and still unfolding events. It evidenced that her reaction had, in fact, been consistent with that of any normal person in such a nightmare situation, and, more importantly, was wholly consistent with the so-called vanilla life and associated inoffensive persona that everyone who knew her kind of presented as her kind of recognized previous life, so to speak. The other important thing with this is that it made sense. It was consistent with, it made her explanations given in court, which otherwise seemed weak to say the least, it made them perfectly reasonable as far as saying why different statements, while there's various statements on the note contradicted each other. The thing I have to say about that post-it note is that even in the absence of her statement to the court that the note was a private way of trying to make sense of what was happening to her, which she did not intend or expect anyone else to read, those facts are obvious from the content and the presentation. It was just a person expressing private thoughts, fears, and anxieties over a massive setback in life. As a purely personal document, not intended for other eyes, the sentence, "I have not done anything wrong," can be taken at face value as a genuine belief. The absence of an intended audience means that there is no one to lie to, and so no purpose to lying. Take another statement. The statement, "I'm innocent," which is also written there, can be interpreted in the same way. Basically, as strong evidence that the fact of the statement is expressive of genuine belief. There are really just so many things that can be said about the contents of the post-it note, but perhaps the most important is that what the police and so many others have jumped on as evidence of guilt is plainly just a textbook example of the effects of gaslighting in action. The term gaslighting originates in a British play turned film from the 1930s. The play was called Gaslight, and the plot is about a husband who mentally and emotionally manipulates his wife into believing she's crazy by changing the intensity of the gas lamps within their home. On the note, Miss Letby writes, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. she also writes, I am evil, I did this. Her explanation in court for saying this, her explanation in court for saying I killed them was this. Because that was the suggestion throughout. I mean, her phrasing is clumsy, but what she's meaning by that is the suggestion from basically the consultants from the hierarchy within the neonatal setup, if not the actual the whole hospital itself. As I said, she said because that was the suggestion throughout, that I'd been removed from the unit, that I'd done something wrong. That was what was being insinuated to me. As far as her explanation of the writing, I am evil, I did this, she explained to the court, what she said was this: because I felt at the time I had done something wrong, and I thought, I'm such an awful, evil person, that I had made mistakes and not known, that somehow I had been incompetent and I had done something wrong to affect these babies. I felt I must be responsible in some way. These two post-it statements evidence her questioning of what she knows to be the truth because of her treatment by people, colleagues and supervisors, by people she respects, who are giving her to who are if you like, pushing her mentally into believing in a different, darker version of reality, by the way they treat her, by the way they are treating her, by the change in their attitude to her, by the things they are have done to her, such as standing her down from the neonatal unit to a support role, giving her remedial training, having the Royal College of Nursing advise her that she's being seen as someone who's not up to scratch in some way with her in her professional competence. Anyway, moving on. The post-it note, reading it naturally caused me to look at everything else with new eyes. So we of course know, we now know that she only wrote that post-it. She only made those statements on the post-it note in the privacy of her own home, at the suggestion of her therapist. And what I have to, the stuff on that note sent me it gives some insight into the way a person speaks, the way they write, the way they phrase things. It gives you insight into their intellect. Now, Miss Letby is educated. She went to university, but as evidenced by her use of language on that post-it note and the pathos of her, well, frankly, juvenile efforts to make sense of her life falling apart around her. Based on that, although she's educated, having been to university, her IQ is not more than at the upper end of normal. To reach consultant status in the NHS, on the other hand, is without a doubt to be in the top 1% of the population IQ wise. As such, on that basis, her apparently lame explanation in court that the 4 consultants must have conspired to have her falsely accused is in reality a more credible thesis in probability terms than the idea that she is an emotionally detached, manipulative, cold-blooded serial killer. Serial killers is not something I've ever studied, but I'm familiar with enough cases and have watched with interest enough documentaries analyzing their abnormal psychology to have an idea of what makes them tick. It seems to me that the thing that really sets them apart from the rest of humanity is not the fact that they are psychopaths, because, in the 21st century world, psychopaths are pretty much dime a dozen. Many criminals are psychopaths, but they don't have a drive to kill and kill again. On top of that, people who aren't even nominally criminal, like are often recognized as exhibiting psychopathic traits. I mean, it is a truism that our political leaders and corporate elite invariably reveal themselves to be textbook studies in psychopathology when their administrative and executive actions are subject to scrutiny. No, serial killers are unique in another way. They are unique in being more emotionally engaged in my opinion anyway. But they're unique in being, what sets them apart is that, unlike everybody else, they are more emotionally engaged by death or the extinguishing of life than by life and the living. This inversion of life and death is perhaps made most clear by the chilling observation of the American serial killer Ed Klemper. He was called the co-ed killer because he targeted young hitchhiking female students in California in the 1970s, in the early 70s. He also killed one set of grandparents. Anyway, this isn't about him. But this guy, he made this must have been in an interview. He made the observation that for him, this is obviously after he's been arrested, that for him, when he walking down the street, when he saw a pretty girl, a part of him wondered what her head would look like on a stick. That for me illustrates better than anything what sets that group of people apart from the rest of humanity. A serial killer is the ultimate non-nurturing personality. They are anti-life. Miss Letby had 2 cats, and I think also she had a dog. She was still going on holiday with her parents in her mid-20s. That's just not the kind of behavior of a serial killer. Anyway, moving on. I want to come on to this. The grievance, which she invoked in September 27, 2016. It came about because in July of 2016, she was involuntarily redeployed from the neonatal unit to an admin role. She was furious about this and made no secret about her sense of resentment because basically she was being prevented from performing the role she had set her heart on and worked steadily towards since learning as a child that she had in fact herself been a premature baby and owed her life to neonatal nurses. The fact that she would be after the fact that after the redeployment she would obviously be getting the same money for a much less stressful role, which wouldn't have been included doing night shifts, which would have been a consolation to a more mercenary soul, was evidently neither here nor there for her in evaluating this change to her work circumstances. Her resentment at what she perceived as unfair treatment only grew over the summer. I think it was also the case that that resentment was fed by being made to do some kind of remedial course, some kind of remedial training. Although I can't remember where I came across that, but I'm pretty certain it's the case. So with all that, by September, she was sufficiently alienated from the body of consultants to be willing to go to war with them by formal complaint under the statutory grievance procedure, which is something obviously all UK organisations are obliged to make available to employees. As anyone with any experience of the grievance procedure will know, nobody's going to invoke it unless they're pretty certain of getting the verdict, so to speak. This is because, despite the grievance procedure being informal, in-house, and without overt sanction, it is more robust and reliable as a tool to get to the truth of any situation than the court system, civil or criminal, ever has been or ever will be. This is because, being informal, the process is non-adversarial, with everything in the hands of the appointed investigator, a person senior to both parties whose impartiality is further informally underwritten by the reality that the parties in question are more often than not people he or she already knows, and most pertinently may have to see and interact with on a daily basis after the conclusion of the investigation. The fact of the grievance procedure being in-house and wholly work-related means that there's no scope for either party involved to bury or otherwise keep any relevant documentary evidence from being considered. All documentary evidence is therefore readily available, as will be any witnesses who need to be spoken to. Again, those witnesses, like the investigator, are kept honest by the fact that the parties will be people they know and will have to effectively live with afterwards. As far as the absence of formal sanction, in reality probably further enhances the integrity of the procedure, because the investigator knows that knows in advance that whatever he or she concludes, whatever their findings are, it's not going to ruin anybody's life. Now, as a person with a university education, it is reasonable to expect that Miss Letby would have performed her due diligence by checking on what the investigation of her complaint would involve before making it. She also brought her father into the grievance procedure as the friend, which is something permitted by the procedure. Her father is a retired manager, and so is likely to have had substantial personal experience of grievance procedures. As such, if Miss Letby had been walking blindly into this thing, I think we can be confident that he would have had the experience and the motivation, it being his daughter, to open her eyes as to what she was doing. And as was ultimately borne out by the findings of the investigation earlier the following year, Miss Letby must have had a settled belief that she was in the right in this whole business. At the time the grievance was initiated, mid-September, Miss Letby was already aware that the spike in deaths was being associated with her, though only from the perspective of lack of competence rather than malice. If she'd been sufficiently slow on the uptake to fail to read between the lines of her redeployment and that remedial training, she got a letter, I believe it was the 3rd of September, certainly it was the first week of September. She got a letter from the Royal College of Nursing, which had as its express purpose giving her information that it was indeed the case that she was being implicated in a competence-wise in the spike in baby deaths. Now, that makes this one of those classic see the wood for the trees, wake up and smell the coffee moments. A person who's been on a killing spree, supposedly, is informed that she has now been linked with the deaths, but in a manner which speaks to developmental issues professionally, carrying no possibility of personal or obviously criminal liability. For this killer, the game is obviously up, but they have actually managed to dodge the bullet. To then initiate an investigation which, of necessity, will involve a new review of the facts and circumstances of those clinical deaths would be the most effective way to go about possibly overturning the current fortuitous state of affairs. It would be to put the head back in the lion's mouth, having just managed to avoid having it bitten off. There is just no possible interpretation of the state of affairs of September 2016 in which the decision of Lucy Letby to initiate that grievance can possibly make sense if she had been killing babies or otherwise had anything to hide. If she had in fact killed 7 babies and attempted to kill a number of others, is she likely to have voluntarily initiated an investigation into the work she had done on the unit? No matter how confident a person might be that their crimes were undetectable, why take such a risk when, even if successful, there was no guarantee of tangible reward? That move made absolutely no sense for someone who is not innocent of wrongdoing and therefore had no fear of the scrutiny of their past actions. It would be totally insane. The fact of bringing her father into the organization to support her in grievance also speaks to a clear conscience. Serial killers, by definition, have more to hide than most. They are secretive people who need to keep their lives compartmentalized in order to keep the double life they necessarily live going. If Miss Letby was indeed living the double life of sweet, doted upon daughter and pitiless serial killer, allowing a person from one of those worlds insight into the other could only increase the chances of exposure. This is even more so the case if that person is a parent, a person who, by definition, knows the individual better than anyone else and is therefore the best equipped of all to see through deceptions. A further question raised by the fact of the grievance is this: in so technical and specialized an environment as a neonatal unit, how likely is it that the police would have been able to disclose more medical evidence linking Lucy Letby to the deaths than the consultants, who would have had the self-same evidence available to use in fighting their corner against the grievance? I think we can be confident that the consultants would have defended their position with vigor and with all the information available to them. Nevertheless, the outcome on that earlier occasion, the grievance, was that they were obliged to eat humble pie, being forced to apologize to Miss Letby and subsequently confirm that apology by letter. Does it not stretch the bounds of credibility way beyond breaking point that a review of the same clinical facts by the same persons just over a year later was suddenly capable of supporting 7 convictions for murder and 8 of attempted murder? In closing, a final point. Prior to getting her mortgage, Miss Letby was actually living in nurses' accommodation on the grounds of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Being new in the job, which it had been her life's ambition to get, as well as being a naturally obliging person, it is the most natural thing in the world for her to show willingness by making herself available to cover extra shift, especially when doing so does not involve any travel. The other consideration is that at that time she was saving to buy to get her mortgage, so that means that these extra shifts, it's just it's easy money. It's easy money because there's no travel inconvenience. She could more or less fall out of bed into work. So just a small point. Anyway, I hope that, thank you for watching. I hope that it has been interesting. I hope some of you might have picked up some stuff from this that you didn't already know. So thanks again, and all the best.